Welcome ladies and gentlemen to another video in the How to Build series. Today's video will be all about Tartaglia. How can we build him? What's the best kind of Tartaglia we can build? All those questions will be answered here. That being said, I want to ask you up front that if you like the content in this video, to leave a like, and if you happen to dislike the video, please tell me why in the comments so I can work on my flaws. If you did like the video, consider subscribing as I will upload an how to build guide for every character in the game. So without further ado, let's deep dive into the content. For Tartaglia, I will go over his main role, what stat to focus on, which talents to level first, what to wear before AR45 and what to wear after AR45. Tartaglia is a main DPS, there's no way to effectively use him as a support. Sub DPS is also a possibility, and I would also not consider him as a burst DPS, since his burst requires setups or will place debuffs that only Tartaglia will benefit from. More on that when I talk about the actual burst though. The reason he is a DPS is that his skills and burst only benefit himself. He's also the only character I find the most confusing when it comes to his talents, so many things to consider when using his skill and burst. Let's start with the basic attack. Normal shots do physical damage like any other bow user, and a charge shot will change this into a hydro shot. But alongside it changing it into a hydro arrow, enemies hit by it will receive the Riptide status. Now, what in the world is Riptide? Well, it's a status debuff that will have different effects on the affected enemy and what kind of way Tartaglia attacks. Also, when ascending to phase 2, Riptide lasts 8 seconds longer. The first two effects of Riptide are, if Child hits the enemy again with a charged aim shot, Riptide Flash occurs, which will continuously hit the enemy with AoE damage. When an enemy affected by Riptide dies, Riptide Burst happens, which will spread Riptide to nearby enemies. Moving on to the skill talent, Tartaglia will assume a melee stance, where he wields 2 hydro swords. You can be in this state for a maximum of 30 seconds until you revert back to the range status automatically. The cooldown to switch back to melee stance varies from the time spent in melee stance, and when you let it revert back automatically, it will be an even longer cooldown, a maximum of 45 seconds. Whenever you hit an enemy in melee stance that is affected by Riptide, guess what happens? Riptide Slash happens. You will deal AoE hydro damage this way, and it's also considered elemental skill damage. After ascending to phase 4, the Riptide status can also be applied to enemies when Child hits them with a critical hit. Last but not least, Tartaglia's burst attack. This can be performed in both ranged and melee stances. When it's performed in ranged stance, he will shoot an arrow in the air that will deal AoE damage and spread the Riptide status. Big surprise there. When it's performed in melee stance, he will perform a slash with a hydro spear that deals massive AoE hydro damage. And this triggers Riptide Blast. When an enemy that is affected by Riptide is hit by Riptide Blast, it will trigger a Hydro Explosion, dealing AoE Hydro damage, and the Riptide status will be cleared. So, Riptide Flash, Riptide Burst, Riptide Slash, and Riptide Blast. Hope you can remember it, because for the life of me, I can't. If it's not clear already, Child is a main DPS, so you will need high attack, high crit, and high Hydro damage output to make use of his complete kit. I don't think there's a meme build for him or a support build that can even be a little viable, so let's just stick with one build. I know, very boring. So let's focus on his main DPS build. The flower, which is main HP, the secondaries need to be attack percent, critical damage percent, and flat attack. The same goes for the plume. The sands need to be attack percent, the secondaries need to be crit damage percent, flat attack, and energy recharge. For the goblet you need hydro damage output. The secondaries need to be attack percent, critical rate, critical damage, and flat attack. For the circlet, your main stat needs to be critical chance, the secondaries need to be attack percent, critical damage percent, flat attack, and energy recharge. For your weapons, if you have 5 stars, the best in slot will be the Skyward Harp by miles, but of course Amos bow can also do the trick. For 4 stars, Rust or Royal Bow for the attack increase, but you could also use the Stringless for elemental mastery and skill and burst damage increase. If none of these weapons are owned, the 3-star Slingshot can be a beneficial weapon for Tartaglia. When looking at these substats, always go from top to bottom in priority. The ones stated here are god rolls, but the best in slot main stat with only the first of the secondaries is fine to start out with. There is not much to say about this build, as it's a fundamentally mainline DPS build. The thing with this build is that you could also substitute the flat attack bonuses with energy recharge. This all depends on how quickly you can actually get your burst attack back, because you will need to use it frequently. It is also necessary if you want to use him as your sub DPS and not the other way around. The skill rotation could be as follows. You apply Riptide to an enemy, you can do it by charging an aim shot or just opening fire with your burst attack. You switch to melee stance and start ripping up the affected enemy or enemies. and when one dies the Riptide status is spread, so don't worry about this as much. Then when your burst is back up, unleash it and revert back to range stance. Now you can check the cooldown in your skill and switch to a sub DPS in your party. Else you can rinse and repeat the process by starting with an application of Riptide. Because if by some miracle you can get a C6 Tartaglia, you can get your melee stance with no cooldown after your burst and melee stance. Just saying. For your talents, max them all. Truly, all his talents are wonderful. But if you need a priority list, go from skill to basic attack to burst. But don't sleep on the basic attack. Try building Child with a 2-piece of Berserker for the extra crit chance and a 2-piece of Gladiators for the attack increase. If you're having issues with your burst, substitute Berserker for an Exile set and you get more energy recharge. This one is straightforward, full set of Heart of Depth, period. It's truly the best in slot for him and he needs nothing else. The 2-piece gives him 15% extra Hydro damage bonus, and the 4-piece, which is just wonderful for him, increases attack damage by 30% after using the elemental skill. It just says, hey, let's bombard these menaces with your Hydro swords. And there we have it, a fully and perfectly built Tartaglia for all your intents and purposes. On the top right corner of the vid, you can click on the information icon to find a playlist of the character's build guides. Should the character you're looking for not be in the list at this moment, it will be in the future. So be sure to subscribe and turn on the notification bell to get notified whenever a video drops. It can be your character by any chance. That would be it. Leave a like if you did like the video and a dislike if you didn't. Maybe tell me why it was disliked so I can work on it if possible. Subscribe for more Genshin content coming up. This was Galaxy Glitchy. Have a good one.
Well, let's not break out the joy loom just yet. Draw.